The nurse at the front desk smiled politely, tapping away at her computer as I signed the form. I'd been to this clinic before, more times than I cared to count. But today felt different, and not just because of the autumn rain clinging to my coat. "Okay, Margaret Whitaker," she said cheerfully. "Looks like your emergency contact has been updated. Would you like to confirm it's correct?" I blinked. "Sure, it should still be my daughter, Susan." The nurse glanced at the screen. "Actually, it says there's no emergency contact on file right now." I froze. "What do you mean, no contact?" She tilted the monitor slightly toward me. "Your daughter's name was removed a few weeks ago. Would you like to add someone else?" I swallowed. The room suddenly felt colder. "No," I said softly. "That'll be all." I walked back to the waiting room, in a daze. My heart was thudding, not from panic, but from a dull, heavy kind of hurt. The kind that doesn't sting right away. It just settles in, quietly, like bad news on a Sunday afternoon. Susan had removed me, not as her emergency contact, but as someone worth calling. I stared at the wall for a long time, ignoring the sound of cartoons playing from a child's tablet 2 chairs down. It wasn't just paperwork, it was a message, and I heard it loud and clear. I remember the first time Susan broke her arm when she was 9. She'd been climbing the oak tree in our backyard, trying to prove something to her older brother, Brian, and slipped halfway up. I heard the thud and the scream all the way from the kitchen. I drove her to the ER barefoot, apron still on, flour on my cheek. I never once thought about who to call. I was the person to call. When she gave birth to her daughter Lily, it was me holding her hand, not her husband. Me. I was the one who rubbed her back during contractions, held her hair when she got sick, and stood beside her when they wheeled her in for a C-section. But today, I wasn't even a name in a database. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm chamomile tea. The house was too quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind where even the walls seemed to whisper, "You don't matter anymore." I picked up my phone and scrolled through my recent calls. No Susan, no Brian, just a few from the pharmacy and one from my friend Dolores, asking about bunko night. I didn't call Susan. I couldn't. What would I say? "Hey honey, just wondering why you made it clear the hospital shouldn't call me if you're in danger." No, that wasn't a conversation. That was a confession they weren't ready to give. And I was done asking for permission to A few days later, I was babysitting Lily, my 8-year-old granddaughter. Susan had dropped her off in a rush like always, handing me a reusable bag filled with snacks and coloring books. She didn't stay long enough to talk, just pecked my cheek, and rushed out the door with a distracted, "Thanks, Mom." Lily and I sat on the floor building a jigsaw puzzle, one of those 1,000-piece landscapes with too many trees. "Grandma," Lily asked, tilting her head, "how come you don't come to my school anymore?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "Last year you helped at the fall fair. This year, Mommy said you were too busy or something." Too busy? I hadn't even known about the fair. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I think Mommy just forgot to tell me. But I'd love to come next time." She grinned. "You should. All the other grandmas were there." The words stung more than I let on. The other grandmas. The ones who got phone calls, the ones who were still listed as part of their families' lives. I smiled and kept puzzling, but my mind was elsewhere. The final straw came a week later. Susan and Brian came over for dinner. Something that hadn't happened in months. I made their favorites: pot roast, cornbread, apple pie from scratch. The house smelled like it used to on Sundays. Everything felt almost normal until we sat down to eat. Halfway through the meal, Brian brought up downsizing. "I've been talking with Susan," he said between bites. And we're really trying to simplify finances, the house, everything. Too much paperwork tied up in old structures, you know? I raised an eyebrow. What sort of paperwork? He glanced at Susan. She avoided my gaze. Well, like the trust, the estate planning stuff. It's not urgent or anything, but we were thinking maybe it's time to revisit it. Make sure everything's modern and practical. There it was. Not a request, not even a suggestion, just a hint, a nudge. A way of saying you've had your time, let's wrap it up neatly, so we can take over. I set down my fork. I see, I said. So modern means excluding people quietly. Susan looked up then. What do you mean? I stared right at her. You removed me from your emergency contact list. She froze. Brian looked confused. Wait. What? I was at the clinic. They told me, there's no one listed for you anymore. No, mother, just a blank space. Susan's mouth opened, then shut again. It's not like that, she said quickly. It was just, the system had a glitch. I meant to fix it. I nodded slowly. Right. Brian looked between us. Why didn't you just call her? Because I was waiting to see if she'd call me. Silent. The only sound was the slow drip of the kitchen sink. I stood. I think dinner's over, I said gently. That night I walked into my office and opened the top drawer. Inside was the thick black folder labeled estate planning, the same one Susan had helped me organize after Mark passed. I flipped through the tabs. Will, trust, power of attorney, medical directives. All of them had her name. Susan Whitaker, trustee, medical proxy, primary beneficiary. I sat in the chair for a long time, staring at the documents. They'd removed me from one line on a screen. I was about to remove them from something far more permanent, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. The next morning, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and opened my planner. On a yellow post-it note, I wrote 3 words: call Judith Evans. Judith had helped Carol update her trust documents last year after her youngest son borrowed her credit card and racked up $1,000 in DoorDash bills. Carol had whispered the story over bingo night, like it was a state secret. She'll set everything straight, Carol had said. Doesn't sugarcoat anything. Exactly the kind of lawyer you need when your own blood forgets who you are. Now, I understood what she meant. I dialed the number. Judith Evans' office. A crisp voice answered. I'd like to schedule an appointment regarding a living trust revision. Certainly. May I ask your name? Margaret Whitaker. You're the one Carol referred. She said you might be calling. Of course she did. We set the meeting for Friday. I had 4 days to prepare, 4 days to walk around the house and remember all the reasons it mattered who inherited it. That week I took stock of everything. Not just the silverware or the photo albums or the record player Mark loved. I looked at the garden beds he built himself, the rocking chair I'd nursed both Susan and Brian in, the guest bedroom that still had Lily's crayon drawings pinned to the corkboard. This wasn't just a house. It was a map of who I had been, and I wasn't about to let it become someone else's trophy by default. When Friday came, I dressed carefully, not in anything dramatic. Just a simple navy blouse and gray slacks. Neat. Respectable. Someone you wouldn't ignore in a hospital lobby. Judith Evans greeted me in a tidy office, lined with books and potted succulents. She offered me water, then got right to the point. So, she said, sliding a notepad in front of her, walk me through why you're revisiting the trust. I told her everything. The clinic, the missing emergency contact, the awkward dinner, the subtle pushes to update my documents. And then I added, it's not that I want to punish them, I just want to protect myself and my story. Judith nodded, understood. It happens more often than people think. Quiet exclusions, shifts in tone, families assuming things. She looked me in the eye. You're not here for revenge. You're here for clarity. That sounded exactly right. We worked through the logistics. I would remain the sole trustee. Medical power of attorney, reassigned to Carol. Executor of the will, switched to an outside professional neutral. Trustworthy. And the beneficiary, well, that's where it got interesting. I didn't remove Susan and Brian completely, but I added a clause. If either party is found to have exercised undue influence, neglected communication regarding medical welfare, or failed to demonstrate consistent familial contact over a 12-month period, their share would be reallocated. Judith called it a decency clause. I called it insurance. On Sunday, Susan called. It was the first time she'd reached out in nearly 2 weeks. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Just checking in." Her voice had that smooth casualness people use when they want something but aren't sure how to ask. "I heard from Brian you've been thinking about changing some things." Straight to the point. I set down my knitting. "I have. It's still my house, Susan. My life. And I think it's wise to plan accordingly." There was a pause. "I just wish you'd included me in the discussion." I almost laughed. "You mean like I was included at the doctor's office? Or the fall fair? Or in that lovely dinner where you gently suggested I start handing over my legacy?" She was quiet for a beat. "I didn't mean for you to feel pushed aside. But I did," I said gently. "And feelings aren't something you get to control once you've caused them." Another silence. Then came the pivot. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "To make this right?" I closed my eyes, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to remember the sound of her asking. I wanted to hold on to it. "I need you to remember that I'm not just a grandmother, or a caretaker, or a name on a deed," I said. "I'm still your mother, a person, someone whose dignity matters." She didn't respond right away, and that was enough of an answer. 2 weeks passed. I saw Lily once, a short visit. She clung to me tighter than usual when she left. Kids know when something's off, even if they don't have the words for it. I baked more than usual, read a bit less, started sitting outside in the evenings with a glass of lemonade, just listening to the wind move through the hedge. The world kept spinning, and I stood my ground. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, handwritten, no return address. The penmanship was unmistakably Susan's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter. "Mom, I don't know how to fix everything I've done wrong. I don't even think I can. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About dignity and memory, and how easy it is to erase someone when you're overwhelmed by your own life. You were always there for me, always, even when I didn't deserve, and I think part of me assumed you always would be. But now I realize you're not just my safety net, you're your own person. I've asked the clinic to reinstate your name. I also told Lily's school to add you to the contact list again. I don't expect that to fix anything, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. Love, Susan." I held the letter for a long time. Then I set it on the table and stared at the empty space where the fruit bowl used to be. A few months ago, I might have cried, but today I just breathed. Not forgiveness, not anger, just the calm of being seen. Later that evening, I called Judith and asked her to send over the final trust documents. No more drafts, no more waiting. I was done letting people rewrite my role in their life. If they couldn't remember me in their emergencies, then I'd make sure they remembered me in their consequences. It had been 3 weeks since I finalized the new trust. 3 quiet, decisive weeks. No phone calls from Susan, no text from Brian, no invitations either. Not to Sunday brunch. Not to Lily's recital, not even to the monthly book club Susan used to host. They didn't say I was unwelcome. They didn't have to. Silence speaks just as loudly when it comes from your own children. But I didn't feel empty. Not anymore. Because somewhere between the attorney's office and the signed papers, I'd remembered something important. Family isn't only the one you're born with. Sometimes it's the one you build when the others drift too far. That Friday, Carol showed up on my doorstep with a tray of lemon bars and a grin like she already knew something I didn't. Thought I'd come by and keep your teapot company, she said. I smiled and stepped aside. Come in, it's been too quiet around here anyway. She set the tray on the counter and sniffed. Is that cinnamon I smell? Don't tell me you've been baking again. Snickerdoodles, I said, pulling the tray from the oven. Old habits die hard. We settled into the living room, just like we always did. Her on the armchair with a blanket across her knees. Me on the couch with a worn pillow tucked at my side. As we sipped our tea, she asked, How's Susan? I hesitated. Distant, thoughtful maybe, but distant. Carol nodded. And how's Margaret? That question hit deeper than I expected. I'm okay, I said honestly. It hurts less now, but I think that's because I stopped expecting them to be different. Acceptance, she said softly. Something like that. That night, I went through old photo albums. Mark and I at the lake. The kids at Halloween in the 90s. Lily's first birthday. Me in the background, holding the cake, beaming like it was my own celebration. I paused on a photo of me and Susan. She was 10, maybe 11, sitting in my lap with a bandage on her chin from where she'd fallen off her bike. I never let go, she'd whispered back then, holding me tight. I traced the photo with my finger and said aloud, You let go now. But I didn't cry. I just flipped to the next page. Over the next week, I started reaching out. Not to Susan or Brian, but to people I'd neglected in my own grief. Women from the church I hadn't seen since Mark's funeral. A retired teacher I used to knit with. The mailman, George, who always waved but never lingered for conversation. One by one, I invited them to a Sunday tea. No special occasion, just a small gathering. Carol helped me bake. I brought out the floral china Mark had insisted we keep for only the fanciest occasion. And by noon, 6 women were seated around my dining room table laughing. Like we were in our 20s again. We shared stories of husbands gone, of grown children who rarely called, of victories too small for anyone to notice, but too precious to forget. By the time the last lemon square was eaten, my heart felt full, not from sugar, from being surrounded by people who saw me. That evening, I took out the letter Susan had written. I read it again. Still no follow-up, no phone call, no visit. I folded it carefully and tucked it in a drawer, not because I forgave her, but because I wasn't going to let that letter be the last word in my story. 3 days later, Brian called. He rarely called. His voice was rushed and clipped. Hey Mom. Just wanted to check in. You doing okay? I knew that tone, the kind you use before asking for something. I'm fine, Brian, I said. What's going on? Well, he dragged it out, then laughed awkwardly. Funny thing, Jen and I were going through some paperwork, and we realized you'd made Carol your medical contact. I mean, not that we care. It's just caught us off guard. There it was. I took a deep breath. You mean like I was caught off guard when I was removed without a word? He paused. It wasn't like that, Mom. It was just easier. You weren't always picking up your phone. I wasn't unreachable, I said calmly. I was just inconvenient. He cleared his throat. So, are you planning to change it back? No, I said. A long silence. You know this is going to create tension. It already has, I replied. He sighed. Okay. Well, I hope you're happy. I'm not happy, I said. But I'm finally at peace. That night I stood by the window with a cup of tea and watched the street lamps flicker on. Across the road, George waved as he loaded mail into the truck. Down the block, I saw children chalking on the sidewalk. And inside my house, there was quiet, but it wasn't the lonely kind. It was the kind that follows after you've cleared the noise, the expectations, the guilt, the kind that means you can finally hear your own thoughts again. That Sunday, I hosted another tea. This time, the women brought food too. casseroles, deviled eggs, a peach cobbler that tasted like it came straight from Georgia. We didn't talk about children, or documents, or disappointments. We talked about joy, about books and movies and trips we wanted to take even if we never would. And when it ended, Carol hugged me tight and whispered, "You're not just surviving anymore, Maggie. You're living." And for the first time in months, I believed it. Later that night, I started a journal, not the kind you fill with feelings or regrets, the kind you leave behind, a record of who I was, what I loved, how I loved, because someday Lily might want to know, and I want her to hear it from me. Not from the edits her parents might add later. The first line I wrote was simple. I was more than they saw. I was everything they forgot to look for. On Tuesday morning, I got a text from Susan. It read, "Lily wants to visit, just her, no pressure." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I wrote back, "Of course, tell her I'll have cookies ready, because here's the truth. You can choose peace over permission. You can protect your story without erasing others. You can say no more without saying no, love." And in the end, the trust I rewrote wasn't just on paper. It was in the people I welcomed, and the boundaries I finally built. When Lily walked through my front door that Saturday afternoon, she looked so much older than I remembered. Her hair was a little longer, her smile a little more hesitant, but those bright blue eyes were still the same. Eyes that had once looked up at me over coloring books and bedtime stories and whispered secrets in the dark. "Hi, Grandma," she said, clutching a backpack to her side like it held the last of her courage. I smiled and stepped aside. "Come in, honey, you're right on time." She didn't ask where her mom was, and I didn't ask why she came alone. Some things don't need to be said out loud. We started with cookies, snickerdoodles, her favorite, still warm. She ate 3 before saying a word. Then finally, wiping her hands on a napkin, she looked at me and asked, "Why don't you come to our house anymore?" I froze. Not because I didn't expect the question, but because I'd rehearsed so many answers. I wasn't sure which one was real anymore. I set my teacup down. "It's complicated, sweetheart." She nodded like she'd already guessed that. "Mom said you're mad at them." I smiled sadly, not mad, just tired. Lily tilted her head. "Did they do something bad?" I looked into her eyes so full of honesty and confusion, and I made a choice. I told the truth, just not the adult version. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind," I said gently. "And sometimes they forget that other people have feelings too." She nodded slowly, digesting it like a grown-up might. "Are you gonna stop being my grandma?" she whispered. That broke me. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Never," I said. "No matter what anyone says, you'll always have a place in my heart." She smiled then, a little one. But it was real. We spent the afternoon baking. Banana bread, then brownie. She spilled flour all over the counter. And we laughed when I got powdered sugar on my nose. We didn't talk about Susan or Brian again. We didn't need to. Later we curled up in the living room and watched an old animated movie I used to play for her when she was 5. Halfway through she leaned against me and said, "I missed this." I kissed her forehead. "Me too, baby." Then she asked very softly, "Grandma, did they really take you off the emergency list?" I froze. This wasn't the kind of question I could answer with metaphors or soft truths, so I nodded. "Yes, they did." She sat up, frowning. "But why?" I think, because they wanted to make space for their version of what a family should be. She blinked. "But you're my family." That sentence was so simple and so powerful. I wrapped my arms around her. "And you're mine." When Susan came to pick her up later that evening, she didn't get out of the car, just waited in the driveway, eyes hidden behind sunglasses even though the sun was starting to set. Lily hugged me tight before leaving. Can I come again next week? Of course, I said. Any time. As she climbed into the car, I saw Susan glance up at the house. Our eyes met through the windshield. She didn't wave, neither did I. But as they drove away, I didn't feel bitter. I felt firm and free. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under my door, folded neatly. No envelope. No name. It read, "She loves you. I know that much. I hope that matters more than what we've both said or done." It was Susan's handwriting. No apology. No excuses. But for the first time in months, it wasn't a document. It was a message. I folded it and placed it beside the journal I was keeping for Lily. Not because it changed anything, but because it meant something. That week, I went back to Judith, my lawyer. We reviewed the trust, the clauses, the contingencies. I didn't want to remove anyone, but I did want to add someone. "Can I designate a minor as a conditional beneficiary?" I asked. Judith smiled. "You want to add your granddaughter?" I nodded. "Not for now. But someday, if she still wants me in her life." We set it up carefully. No sudden wealth, just security. A note in the documentation: "If Margaret passes before Lily is of legal age, a trustee will hold the funds until she is 25, provided she remains in regular contact." It wasn't about the money. It was about legacy. It was about leaving her something that said, "You mattered." Later that evening, I sat on the porch with Carol. She hadn't heard from her son in 6 months. We talked about how strange it is that you can raise a child with every ounce of love you have, and still somehow end up feeling like an afterthought. "But we're not afterthoughts," she said. "We're the foundation. They just built over us." I nodded slowly. I think I stopped wishing they'd dig me out and started building something new. She smiled. "That's what healing looks like." A few days later, I hosted a birthday tea. Not for me. Not for anyone. Just a gathering, a celebration of us. Carol came, so did Judith. To my surprise, she'd been invited before but never made it. And just as we were setting out the cups, Lily arrived. She walked in like she belonged, because she did. That afternoon, she handed me a card, handmade, glittery, crooked stickers, and a drawing of us, holding hands. Inside, in her uneven writing, it said, "You are my always person." I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen. I didn't want to cry in front of the others, but the tears came anyway. Not of grief, but of recognition. Someone still saw me, and sometimes one voice, one small, honest voice, is enough to drown out a lifetime of being forgotten. Because I wasn't just a grandmother again, I was her grandmother, and no one could ever remove me from that list. I wasn't expecting a knock that morning. I just finished watering the hydrangeas when I heard it. 2 sharp taps on the screen door. It was Susan. She stood there with a thick yellow envelope in her hands and a wary look in her eye. "I need to talk," she said. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. She must have felt it, because she added, "Please." I opened the door and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Lily and I had baked cookies just weeks before. Susan placed the envelope on the table between us like it was radioactive. She didn't touch her coffee, didn't look me in the eye. "They want us to update our will," she said. "The family attorney recommended a joint one. You know, to keep things clean." I didn't say a word. She fidgeted. "They also said it might be helpful to align ours with yours, for clarity. Just in case something happened." I finally met her eyes. "Something like what?" She blinked, caught. "Just in case, medical emergencies, estate confusion, that sort of thing." I smiled without warmth. Funny, I was already confused about who was on whose list. Her face flushed. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said softly. But you did, I replied. Silence. Then she pushed the envelope closer. This is a draft. We want you to review it. Maybe we can talk about what's in yours too. That way, no one's left out. It was almost clever. Almost. But I saw the desperation, the legal nervousness behind the gesture. Not love, not even guilt, just concern. About money. About assets. About being cut out. I didn't open the envelope. Instead, I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the living room. I opened a small locked drawer and pulled out a red folder, thick, pristine. The one Judith had helped me prepare. I set it down on the table beside hers. No need, I said. This is the final version. It was signed last week. She looked at it like it was poison. What does it say? She asked quietly. That I have one granddaughter who visits me, who calls, who sits with me, and asks real questions. Her eyes narrowed. You're putting everything in Lily's name. No. I'm putting everything in a trust. Lily will have access under specific conditions. You and Brian are no longer listed. Her mouth opened. But I didn't give her time. Not because I hate you, but because you treated me like furniture. Until you needed me again, and people who do that don't deserve a say in what I've built. She stood quickly, cheeks red with frustration. We were just trying to figure things out. You blindsided us. No, I said calmly. You erased me, and I simply decided I wasn't going to stay invisible. She picked up her envelope and stormed toward the door. But just before leaving, she turned and hissed, "You're making a mistake." I sipped my coffee. So did you. That night I wrote Lily another journal entry. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that feel too big to forgive. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And remembering doesn't mean returning. It just means learning who someone really is, and deciding if you're still safe there. I didn't write it to make her choose. I wrote it so she'd never feel confused about why I did what I did. The next few weeks were quiet, too quiet. Brian didn't call, Susan didn't visit, but Lily kept coming, sometimes with cupcakes. Sometimes just to do her homework at the table while I crocheted in the corner. She started asking more questions about my past, about her grandfather, Mark, about my childhood even. It felt like building something from scratch with a granddaughter who wanted to know me not because of obligation, but because of genuine love. One day she brought me a binder. "I want to write your story," she said shyly. "Like a school project, but just for us." I blinked. "You want to write about me?" She nodded. "Everyone writes about famous people, but you're my favorite person." I don't remember what I said. I just remember crying. One Sunday afternoon, I got a call from Carol. "You'll never guess who I ran into," she said. "Who?" "Brian." At the pharmacy, my heart tensed. "He asked about the will," she said slowly. "Tried to act casual, but not very good at hiding worry." I smiled. "They always assume it's about the money." Carol chuckled. "They forget what it costs to feel forgotten." That night, I updated my trust. Judith helped me add one more clause. If anyone contests the arrangement, their claim is voided entirely. I didn't add that part out of spite. I added it because I was finally protecting myself. A few days later, I was invited to Lily's school play. Susan didn't know I'd be there. I saw her 2 rows up, whispering with another parent, her expression unreadable when she spotted me. But Lily saw me too, and her face lit up like a Christmas tree. She waved so hard her paper crown slipped off her head. I waved back. It was the best seat in the house. After the play, Susan approached me in the hallway. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. "She invited you?" she asked. "No, the school did," I said. "She listed me as her emergency contact." The irony wasn't lost on her. She looked away, then back at me. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad, but they did. Can we fix it?" I sighed. "You can't undo trust with an apology. It takes actions and time." She nodded slowly. "I don't expect to be in your will," she muttered. I don't want her to grow up thinking we don't care. "Then start caring," I said. "Show her." Not me. That weekend, Lily brought me a new page for the story she was writing. On it, she'd drawn a picture of us on the porch. She wrote, Chapter 4, the day Grandma took her story back. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. Because that's what this was. Not revenge, not punishment. Just reclamation. The kind that doesn't need to be shouted. The kind that is signed, notarized, and sealed with love. It was a Thursday morning when Susan called again. I let it ring twice before answering. Part of me expected her voice to be clipped, defensive. But instead she sounded small. Mom, she began. I wanted to ask you something important. I waited. I'm thinking, she continued. About Lily, about the family, about everything. And I know we haven't been good at showing it. But Brian and I, we do care. We really do. Her voice wavered like she was trying hard not to fall apart. I want to know if we can meet. Just talk. Face to face. Please. I said yes. But this time, I didn't go alone. I called Carol and asked her to come with me. Not because I expected a fight, but because this time, I wanted someone who could witness my boundaries. Someone who wouldn't let them twist my words, the way they used to. We met at a coffee shop near their home. Bright lighting. Loud espresso machine. Too public for anyone to yell. They were already seated when we walked in. Susan rose quickly. Brian followed a beat slower. Carol stayed silent, sitting beside me like quiet armor. We've been thinking about the estate, Susan said once pleasantries were out of the way. And we realize it wasn't right to leave you out the way we did. From the hospital contact list. From planning. From everything. I tilted my head, letting her continue. Brian chimed in. We were overwhelmed. That's not an excuse. It's just what happened. We thought we had things under control. And maybe we didn't, but we want to make things right. Then came the ask. They wanted to be added back into my estate plans. Not directly. They didn't say the word will, but they hinted at it. If something happened to you, Susan said, it would mean the world if you trusted us again. I sipped my coffee slowly. Then I pulled out a small envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. It had a single sheet of paper inside. It was a printed copy of my updated trust summary. The version excluding them completely. Susan glanced at it, then up at me. I already made my decision. I said, not because of anger, but because I needed to protect my peace. Brian leaned forward. We didn't mean to, but you did, I said softly. You removed me from the emergency contact list without asking. You made legal and medical choices without me, and when I confronted you, you gaslit me, said it was an oversight, called me dramatic. I was scared, Susan whispered, of what might happen if you were in charge. I nodded slowly. You didn't trust me to care for you. But now you want me to trust you with what I leave behind. The silence after that was thick. Carol looked between us, but said nothing. Finally, Susan asked, is there any way back? I folded my hands. There might be, but not through words, not through more talks. Like this. I turned to Brian. Do you even know Lily's middle name? He blinked. Of course I. He hesitated. He didn't know. Susan looked embarrassed. That's what I mean, I said. It's not about paperwork. It's about effort. It's about seeing the people in front of you. They didn't argue. They just sat there, deflated, and maybe, for once, finally listening. Back home, I sat with Carol at the kitchen table. You did the right thing, she said. I nodded. But it still hurts. It always will, she replied. When it comes from your own blood, it cuts different. I reached into the drawer where I kept Lily's journal. There was something comforting about writing it all down, not for drama, not for legacy, just for clarity. I added a line. Trust isn't something you give back after it's been broken. It's something you earn by building again, brick by brick. A few days later, I was at the local library when something strange happened. An older man, mid-60s, tall, gentle, approached me while I was looking at the gardening books. Margaret Hartley, I turned, confused. Yeah, I'm Peter Marsh. I used to work with your husband, Mark. My heart skipped. Mark spoke about you often, he said. Said you were the backbone of the family, the quiet one, who saw everything. I laughed lightly. That's a nice way of saying I never missed a thing. He smiled. He was proud of you. Just thought you should know that. We spoke for a while, about Mark, about old times, about nothing and everything. When I got home that evening, I added another page to Lily's story binder. Chapter 5. When a stranger remembered what my family forgot. Later that week, Susan sent a letter, not a text, not a voicemail, a real letter. In it, she apologized again, but this time, she didn't ask for anything. She included stories Lily had drawn. She wrote about how she remembered me singing lullabies to her as a child, how she missed those days and how she knew deep down she'd let something break inside us and didn't know how to fix it. I didn't write back, but I did keep the letter. Some things need time. That Sunday, Lily and I baked banana bread. She told me about a girl at school who'd been calling her names. I asked if she wanted me to come talk to the school. She shook her head. I handled it, she said. I told her she doesn't get to decide who I am. I smiled. That's right. Then she paused and looked up. You didn't let Mom and Dad decide that for you either, huh? My heart tugged. No, sweetheart, I didn't. She nodded and went back to mashing bananas. That one moment? That's what freedom looks like. Later that evening, I sat down and looked through the trust papers again, not to change anything, but to add one final letter to Lily. A sealed one, marked to be opened on your 21st birthday. Inside, I wrote about everything. Not to burden her, but to remind her that dignity is quiet. That love isn't a transaction, and that silence, when chosen, is sometimes the loudest justice of all. The phone rang at 3:07 p.m. on a cloudy Tuesday. It was Judith Evans, my estate attorney. Margaret, she said in her smooth, professional tone. Just a heads up. I received a call from your daughter this morning. My stomach dropped, but I didn't speak. She asked a lot of questions about revoking your trust, about transferring the house title. She didn't outright demand anything, but she was fishing. Thought you should know. I let out a slow breath. Did she try to claim I wasn't in the right mind? There was a pause. She implied concern. Judith said. Used phrases like worried about clarity and might not understand all the implications. But I told her firmly that you were not only clear, you were thorough. You initiated every step with full documentation. I closed my eyes. So that was the new angle. They couldn't guilt me. They couldn't scare me. So now they'd try to paint me as incapable. I'm not surprised, I murmured. They've been doing that for years in smaller ways. Quiet undermining. Casual doubt. Well, Judith said, the trust is airtight. And I've documented everything. If they push further, we can handle it. I smiled. Thank you. You're not just my lawyer anymore. You're my safety net. Judith laughed softly. Glad to be both. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over Susan's voice in my head. Her sudden interest, her letter, and now this. I should have known the apology wasn't complete. Not yet. Something in her words had been off. Too rehearsed. Too. So I got up and went to my closet. Mark's old file box was still there. I hadn't opened it since the day we started the Living Trust. Inside were his old business notebooks, letters, tax files, and tucked between two photo albums, a folder labeled "If Anything Happens to Me." My heart stopped for a moment. I opened it, and there it was. A handwritten letter from Mark, dated 10 years before he passed. He'd listed accounts I didn't even know about, land we'd inherited in Mississippi. A lake cabin deed I'd thought we sold years ago, but apparently only rented out. At the bottom of the letter, one final line. Make sure whoever stands beside you at the end is someone who stood beside you when you had nothing. I cried. Not from grief, but from the sheer depth of how well he'd known what might come. The next day, I called Judith again. I want to add a clause, I said. What kind? A safeguard clause. One that says any attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent automatically disqualifies the initiator from inheritance. Completely. Retroactively. Judith whistled softly. You're serious, dead serious. She chuckled. I like it. We'll call it the respect clause. By the weekend, Susan called again. This time she didn't even bother pretending. Mom, she said sharply. Why did you tell your lawyer we were harassing you? I didn't, I said calmly. She called me after you called her. We were just asking questions about how to undo what I put in place. Behind my back. There was silence. Then, this is ridiculous. You're punishing us for something minor. We were trying to help. I laughed. Just once, dry and tired. You took me off the hospital contact list. You locked me out of family decisions. And now you're trying to undo the one thing I've done to protect myself. That's not helping, Susan. That's erasing. She raised her voice. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Judith disagreed. Another pause. Is she manipulating you? Feeding you fear? That made me laugh again. Judith, the same woman you tried to sweet talk into giving you confidential documents. Susan sputtered. I didn't. You did. She told me. And now you've lost every last thread of credibility you had left. There was a sharp inhale. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I already regret trusting you. Then I hung up. That evening, Lily came over with Carol. She brought a painting she made in art class. It was a little crooked, full of colors that didn't quite match. But in the center was a house, my house, and on the porch, two stick figures. One's me, she said proudly, and the other's you. Because this is your house, Grandma, not theirs. I hugged her so tight she squeaked. Later I tucked her into bed in the guest room. I watched her sleep for a while, her little chest rising and falling, calm and unbothered. Children don't lie, they just reflect what they feel. And in that moment, I felt seen. On Monday, Judith sent me an updated copy of the trust, now including the respect clause. I framed it, not the whole thing, just the clause itself, and I hung it in my home office, right beside my old wedding photo with Mark. Two reminders, one of love and one of self-worth. The letter came on a Thursday. Not from Susan this time, but from her husband Jack. Thick, cream-colored envelope. My name typed neatly in block letters, like it was business and not personal. I opened it at the kitchen table, with the kettle whistling behind me. Inside was a neatly printed message. No dear Mom. No warmth. We regret that you've decided to take such drastic steps without considering the long-term effect on our family. The children are confused. Susan is hurt. We hope you will reconsider the legal changes you've made for everyone's sake. We've always acted in your best interest. Any suggestion otherwise is both false and deeply disappointing. It ended with a line that stayed with me longer than it should have. You were never meant to feel excluded, but actions have consequences. That last line, that was the giveaway. Not an apology, not even a request. A warning, veiled, cold, self-righteous. I placed the letter back into the envelope, stood up, and calmly dropped it into the trash. I'd spent too many years giving people the benefit of the doubt while they gave me the burden of silence. Not anymore. That weekend, I invited Carol over and asked her to help me with something. We sat at my kitchen table, just like we had through every big moment of our friendship, and drafted a letter, a real letter, one that would go into my safety deposit box, along with the trust documents. I called it the Statement of Truth. It explained how I'd been removed from the emergency contact list without my knowledge, how no one informed me when I was being bypassed, how I had been treated as a liability, a background figure, until they realized I was also the one holding the keys to their future. The letter ended with one final paragraph. My estate is not a reward for obedience. It's a reflection of relationships built on love, respect, and presence. This trust is not just legal, it's personal, and it reflects my full awareness, full agency, and full intention. Carol signed it as a witness, and then we went out for milkshakes, like we used to when the kids were still in middle school. On Sunday, Daniel dropped by, unexpected. He stood on the porch for a moment, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed in anymore. I opened the door, smiled, and said, "Still your mother, Daniel, not a prison guard." He looked sheepish. Inside, we sat in the living room. No TV on, no tea, just stillness. "I heard about the trust," he said. I nodded. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Susan's been intense lately. That's a word for it. He stopped. I wanted to say I get it. I didn't before, but I do now. That surprised me. I saw the way she talked to you at Lily's recital," he added, "like you were just an obligation." I tilted my head. "You didn't say anything then." "I know, and that's on me." He looked up. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. I'm sorry." I nodded slowly. "That means more than you think." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But when he left, I felt a little less alone. A week passed. Susan didn't call. Jack didn't show up. But Lily did. She came by after school, carrying her backpack and a heart-shaped cookie she'd made in home ec. She climbed into the chair next to me and whispered, "Mom says you're mad." I looked at her carefully. "Do I seem mad?" She tilted her head. "No, just strong." That made me smile. "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. And I'm not mad at your mom. I'm just making sure I'm treated right." She nodded. "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." I took her hand. "You already are." I didn't change the locks again. I didn't shut the door, but I didn't leave the future to chance either. The trust was filed. The witness statements were in place. My medical directive now listed Carol as my first contact, with Daniel as the second, because if I collapsed in the kitchen tomorrow, I didn't want the hospital calling someone who saw me as a burden. I wanted someone who'd hold my hand, not roll their eyes. The next family dinner was quieter. Susan didn't come. Jack sent a text saying, "We'll let things cool down." But I didn't feel frozen. I made brisket. Lily helped. Daniel brought a bottle of wine. And we sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. No shouting, no guilt, just the sound of crickets and healing. At the end of the night, I walked into my office, opened the drawer and pulled out one last envelope. I'd written it weeks ago, before any of this started. It was addressed to Susan. I unfolded it and read it again. "Dear Susan, I raised you to speak your mind, to stand up for what's right. But somewhere along the way, you decided right was whatever suited you in the moment. You saw me as inconvenient, as background noise. But I was never just background. I was the foundation, and even foundations eventually crack. This isn't revenge. This is reminder that I was here, that I mattered, that I still do." Mom, I didn't send it. Not yet, but I kept it ready. Because some things need to be said, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And that was how I took myself off their list and put myself back on mine. No drama, no door slamming, just a quiet reshaping of the future, one signature at a time.